Hello everyone and welcome to the 10-year war, Woody versus Bo. I'm Paul Warfield. From 1961 to 63, I was a wide receiver for Woody Hayes and the Ohio State Buckeyes.
And I'm Jim Brandstatter. I played offensive tackle from 1969 to 71 for the Michigan Wolverines and Bo Schembechler.
We're at Michigan Stadium to talk about the game, and it's obvious, Jim, you have the home field advantage.
Paul, we've had the home field advantage no matter where we've played. Throughout college football, few rivalries have created the intensity of Michigan versus Ohio State. And during the 10-year span between 1969 and 78, the rivalry became even greater and more intense, partly because the stakes were higher, but mostly because of the coaching matchup.
It was a time of great victories and bitter defeats. Controversy became commonplace, and the Big Ten's bowl policy was changed as a direct result of this rivalry. Almost every year, the conference championship and the Rose Bowl hung in the balance when these two powers met. But beyond all of that were the coaches. It wasn't just Ohio State versus Michigan. It was the 10-year war, Woody versus Bo.
And being a graduate of Michigan and having played for Bo, I'm well within bounds in saying that, for the most part, the Wolverines outplayed Ohio State during those years, and the series really shouldn't have been as close as it was, Paul.
It's not really surprising that you would say that, Jim, but being the student of the game that you are, you also must know that it's what's on the scoreboard that counts. And Michigan was very lucky to be on the same field as the Buckeyes. And in some games, the better team didn't win, like in the series' first year, 1969.
Yeah, but that's not what the scoreboard said, Paul.
Touché. When the 10-year war began in 1969, the Ohio State football program was considered the nation's best. They hadn't lost a game in 2 years and were marching toward a second straight national title. Leading up to the game, the Buckeyes had destroyed 8 straight opponents. Their lowest margin of victory in 1969 was 27 points. Since the opening game of the season, they had been ranked #1 in the country in all of the polls. The names of Rex Kern, Jim Otis, and Jack Tatum were being bandied about as the leaders of the best college football team ever assembled. When the vaunted Buckeyes invaded Ann Arbor on a cold Saturday in November to play Michigan, it was expected to be a rout.
The Wolverines were a team that had lost 2 of their first 5. They had been blown out 40-17 in their own stadium by Missouri earlier in the year. Despite the rocky start, Michigan won their last 4 heading into the Ohio State battle. But as the showdown approached, this was still a team in transition. The Wolverines were led by a rookie coach named Schembechler, who played for and coached for the Ohio State legend Woody Hayes. Nobody gave Schembechler, the student, much of a chance against Woody, the teacher. After all, the Buckeyes were awesome.
That team probably was the greatest football team that Woody ever had. It had no weakness.
But they beat the greatest team that ever stepped on a college football field. I don't think there's any question what our '69 team, and I don't say that with bias, we were so far ahead in the national polls when we went up there that wasn't even close.
I think that we were fortunate to catch them at a time when everybody was hailing them as the greatest collegiate team of all times. And there's an old saying that I learned from the coach at Ohio State. And that was that when people start saying a lot of nice things about you, look out.
We'd won too many, and it's easy to get soft. And as hard as you talk to them, they still think they can win. Well, nobody had come within 4 touchdowns all year of them. And it's hard to convince guys. And Bo, of course, had lost a couple of ball games to just not too good of football teams. And it looked like we were a shoo-in, but we weren't. And that's the way football goes.
When we took the field the first time, Jim Mandich was my captain, and Woody was warming up on our side of the field. And I knew that wasn't his first time in Michigan Stadium. So I think what happened was, well, players were kind of testing me. Hey, Bo, Ohio State's warming up on our side of the field. So I went out and told Woody, I said, Woody, you're on the wrong side of the field. You're supposed to be down there. He says, okay, bug it down there. And he waved his troops on. Well, when that happened, of course, that stimulated a lot of enthusiasm in the tunnel for our team.
We were trying to psych one another. Sure, he's not above that, nor am I.
In the first quarter, Ohio State established control with a TD drive on their opening possession. Jim Otis scored, and the Bucks led 6-0. Michigan answered right back with a drive of their own, and Garvey Craw capped it off, going over from the 3. And with the extra point, Michigan led 7-6. But Ohio State came back on their next possession. They marched 74 yards and took the lead back on this Rex Kern to Jan White TD pass. Again, the extra point was missed, but the Buckeyes had established a 12-7 lead. The Michigan offense then got back in gear, and thanks to Billy Taylor's 28-yard twisting and turning draw play, the Wolverines were knocking on the door once again. Craw dove over from the 1-yard line, and with the game still in the second quarter, Michigan was ahead 14-12. Then came a big moment in this one. Forced to punt, Ohio State's Mike Sensabaugh kicked deep to the Wolverines' Barry Pearson, and the St. Ignace, Michigan native started having the game of his life. Remember that name, Paul?
Pearson who?
You'll remember. He returned the punt 60 yards to the Ohio State 3. Quarterback Don Moorhead scored 2 plays later, and Michigan, the underdog, had forged ahead 21-12. Before the half ended, Tim Killian added a Michigan field goal, and after 30 minutes, Michigan was the surprise 24-12 leader.
We were blowing out every team we played by 5, 6, 7, 8 touchdowns. We were an explosive, excellent football team.
We scored first, but we didn't stay ahead, and they returned a punt down to about the 5-yard line, went in from there. And they had 24 points at the end of the half. Now, that's not like us. We had 12. And the second half, he played smart ball. He played for a stalemate, and that's exactly what happened. The game ended up that way.
In the second half, the defenses took over, and Michigan's secondary played inspired football. Forcing Ohio State to pass, the Wolverines picked off 6 Buckeye passes. Pearson had 3 by himself. 4 of those interceptions were thrown by All-American Rex Kern.
We played to stop Kern. We felt that he would hurt us more than the fullback and tailback.
My big mistake, I never should have had him in the ball game, because he couldn't even walk when he got up Saturday morning. He was that bad from the day before. And I should have started Mason Jowski, who was a doggone good quarterback. But Rex, I think, had 4 interceptions. Well, that wasn't any more like Rex than anything in the world. Although Michigan was a good pass defense team, they weren't that good.
We knew we had a great chance to win. I honestly felt going into that game, we beat them.
And when the dust had settled, Michigan had pulled the 24-12 upset of the decade.
In year 2 of the 10-year war, the college football world couldn't wait for the rematch between Ohio State and Michigan. This classic had been brewing all season. The Buckeyes, with Rex Kern in the game, still in charge in Columbus, had rolled through the season unbeaten on a collision course with Michigan. But the Buckeyes weren't the powerhouse of the past 2 years. They at times seemed vulnerable. During the year, they had to come from behind at the half to beat Northwestern. And the week before they met Michigan, a field goal in the last 2 minutes was their margin of victory in a 10-7 thriller over Purdue.
The Wolverines, on the other hand, while matching Ohio State step for step in victories, were doing it impressively. Their smallest margin of victory in the conference was 2 touchdowns. All-American candidates Don Moorhead and Henry Hill were the catalysts of this Wolverine outfit, and with their dominant play during the stretch run, Michigan looked like a solid favorite going in. But the tone for this game had been set the year before. Michigan's upset win in 1969 was the focal point for the 1970 game.
I would say that following the 69 game, the tempo of the series was set. I mean, it was going to be the game.
We started talking about them, and we started doing this. See, they had an announcer up there that sort of made fun of one of our Polish kids, our quarterback, Masajowski, mispronounced it, laughed. We put that in the locker room. He had a quarterback. He had a quarterback who had, when Kay Kessler was up there, and Kay asked him, who comes from Ohio to Michigan? See, this kid was from Massillon. Well, he says, only the good ones. So we'd stick that on the board, only the good ones. We finally got all we'd have to say is only. And our kids got the point, but you're always trying to ruffle things up a little bit.
And things got ruffled early in this one, fumble on the opening kickoff. And Bo knew that mistake didn't do much for his chances.
Yeah, well, that gave some indication about what was going to happen there.
70 game, we made a blocking adjustment, and it was perfect. It was perfect. I don't like to use that term, but it was perfect. We ran a single given play for 25 times, and we gained almost all of our yardage on that play. And we anticipated, when we started hurting with it, how they'd change. We were ready for their change, and then they changed again. We were ready for the next change, and then they changed a fourth time. And we were ready for the fourth change, and all this had to be done within a 20th of a second. There's one fella, the right guard, and we're running to the left guard, had to read this defense, and he had about a 20th of a second to do it.
Woody's adjustments did job. The ground-controlled offense and the very stubborn defense had the Buckeyes in front 10-3 at the half. The only touchdown in the first two quarters came through the air as Rex Kern hit Bruce Jankowski for 26 yards in the score as the Bucks took control. The Wolverines stormed back in the second half. Don Moorhead went to the air and found Paul Staroba in the corner of the end zone for the score. In the final quarter, Ohio State hit a field goal for a 13-9 advantage, but it wasn't over until Stan White made the big play for the Bucks. White picked off a Moorhead pass and returned it to the Michigan 9-yard line. The Buckeyes then put the lid on this victory as Leo Hayden swept the right end and scored for a 20-9 Ohio State victory as revenge was served.
Ohio State legitimately won the game. That is the one game in the 10 games that I played against Woody where I felt that, without question, Ohio State was the better team.
And despite Michigan's huge upset win of the previous year, Coach Hayes felt the 1970 win was the greatest of the decade, something Bo easily understood.
I'm going to tell you this. If you ask any coach about the greatest game of the decade, it's going to be one he played and won, no matter how you add it up.
In 1971, the undeclared war between Michigan and Ohio State raged into its third year. This one was a little different, though. Ohio State was suffering a down year. They had lost 3 games coming into their battle against Michigan, and on game day, not one Buckeye starter remained from their previous year's Big Ten champion team. As a matter of fact, Ohio State entered Michigan Stadium that Saturday afternoon, riding an unheard-of 2-game losing streak, having dropped games to Michigan State and Northwestern the 2 previous weeks.
Michigan, on the other hand, was loaded. They had roared through the season untouched. All-American tailback Billy Taylor led the offense, and on defense, the Wolverines led the nation in Americans Tom Darden and Mike Taylor. Michigan had been so dominant during the year that they had recorded 3 shutouts and had outscored the opposition 399-63 state game. It shaped up to be a blowout. But on that cold, gray November day in Ann Arbor, Ohio State was simply too proud to be run over.
We had already clinched the championship. We're going to the Rose Bowl. We were 10-0. Ohio State had a tremendous advantage. They're playing with pride now. And when you can play with pride and sell out, it's going to show, particularly defensively.
We didn't have a single starter from the year before on offense. We had one, All-American Tom DeLone, and we lost him the week before. So now our defense played a wonderful, wonderful football game.
The Ohio State defense was absolutely tenacious. I mean, they played great football. I don't think that our offense played badly because we blocked well. We did all the things necessary to get it done, but that Ohio State defense was something special. Their offense couldn't move across the street.
That was one of the weakest teams we've had. You see, we lost all of those great football players from the year before. And we did not have a good team. Well, we lost totally 4 games that year. That's about as much as we ever lost.
The inspired Buckeyes played a great first half. They surrendered chunks of yardage, but they didn't break. Despite outgaining Ohio State 193-53 in the half, Michigan could only manage a Dana Coyne field goal in the second quarter for a 3-0 halftime lead. The third quarter, Tom Campana.
Remember that name, Jeff?
Yeah, I remember it, but I forgot it real quick. Anyway, he took a punt at his own 15 and scampered 85 yards for the touchdown. The play stunned Michigan, and Ohio State now led 7-3. And an upset appeared in the making as the Buckeye faithful began to believe. But Michigan reached deep. And late in the fourth quarter, they put together a 72-yard drive that was capped off by Billy Taylor's 22-yard touchdown run. Michigan had regained a 10-7 lead over the gutty Buckeyes. Ohio State's last gasp for the upset ended moments later as Tom Darden intercepted a Buckeye pass and it was over. But Coach Hayes wouldn't let it end. He was livid with a no call on what he thought was interference. Woody vented his anger by tearing up the sideline markers, but to no avail. The Wolverines won it 10-7.
Woody insisted, of course, that was pass interference. I have never felt that it was an obvious pass interference play. I thought it was a great interception on my side of the field, but Woody saw it differently.
That's the worst call on that pass interference that I've ever seen. That's when it broke up the sideline markers to show people just how lousy it was. Well, it was the worst call I've ever seen. And officials can make mistakes like that. Will never work for me again.
I have always felt this way, that because we had controlled their offense so well, that if I had to do over again, I'd have called timeout. And I'd have gone out to Jerry Markbright, the referee, and said, put the ball right where we are accused of interference, and we'll finish the game, because I don't think they can score anyway. That's what I should, if I had to do over again, I think that's what I'd done.
And it was pass interference without any question. Now you can't say anything, and the commissioner will get on you, but it is horrible, just horrible. He can't get on me now.
Now, Paul, being a receiver, what was your opinion of the interception by Darden that ended that 71 game?
I agree with Woody completely. It was interference and should have been called. The refs appeared to be intimidated by the big crowd. If the instant replay were in effect back then, the call would have been overturned.
I knew you were going to say that. You know that?
I'm a student of the game.
I'll buy that. But the scoreboard still reads Michigan 10, Ohio State 7.
I knew you were going to say that.
As the 1972 Classic approached, emotions still ran high as the fourth chapter of the 10-year war produced new heroes for both sides in Columbus and Ann Arbor. Michigan, having lost most of its name players to graduation, still had a solid squad. As a matter of fact, with sophomore quarterback named Denny Franklin at the helm, the Wolverines surprised the experts by running through the 1972 season without a loss. It was defense that kept the Wolverines unbeaten. They recorded 4 shutouts during the season as they headed in against Ohio State in a strong position.
The Buckeyes, in the meantime, were building a big season of their own. Greg Hare had come into his own as a quarterback, and new fullback Champ Henson was carrying on the battering ram tradition of Ohio State's ground game. The Bucs stumbled just once during the year, losing a 19-12 upset at Michigan State, and new names began to surface as the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry loomed ahead. The name that created the most impact in this series wore the scarlet and gray. He placed his mark in this war in a very special way. Just a freshman in 1972, his number was 45, and his name was Archie Griffin.
And Archie, in 4 years, never played in a losing Michigan game. He meant that much to us. Now, one year they tied us up there 10-10, but we never lost to Michigan in the 4 years we had Arch.
In 72, there isn't any question. Ohio State's great goal line stands, our ineffectiveness in goal line offense, meant an Ohio State victory, 14-11. The thing that beat us was a lousy goal line offense. There's no question about it. And let's face it, Ohio State played great defense in the goal line. I mean, you got to have both of them in order. I'm not denying that at all.
We had a great defense that year, super defense. And in effect, that's what changed the ball game because of the 2 great goal line stands. And we got 2 touchdowns. And they couldn't make 2 touchdowns, and that is the difference in the ball game.
But we had no trouble moving the ball. We just had trouble scoring.
The first half of this one saw Michigan dominate. They moved the ball well, getting into Ohio State territory often, but they could only manage 3 points on a 35-yard Mike Lantry field goal. Ohio State could only put together 1 serious threat, but they capitalized on it. Archie Griffin's 18-yard scamper set up Champ Henson's 1-yard plunge for the score. And at the half, although outplayed, Ohio State held a 7-3 lead. In the third quarter, Griffin was at it again for Ohio State. He found a seam on the right side and bolted for a 30-yard touchdown. The Buckeyes now had a firm grasp on this one at 14-3. But Michigan responded immediately, taking the following kickoff and moving 58 yards in 13 plays for the score. Fullback Ed Shuttlesworth got the touchdown from a yard out, and it was a 14-9 game in position to tie it open in the end zone for a 2-point conversion, and it was 14-11 Buckeyes. Michigan couldn't get any more, though, as Ohio State emerged the winner by 3. Buckeye fans tore down the goalpost prior to the official end of the game, and that had Woody worried.
If they'd have gotten to kick a field goal at the other end of the field, when I saw our students tear down the goalpost, it frightened me, and I ran down there to try to get them to not do it. Would say, all right, now they'll get a chance to kick at the other end. Then they'd had the wind at their back and might have made it and tied us.
Year 5 of the 10-year war saw a crisis of sorts develop as the hostilities between Michigan and Ohio State unfolded. Both teams were winning. The Buckeyes, behind the incomparable Archie Griffin, were unbeaten throughout the season. Ohio State had added a strong defense to the package in 1973 as they recorded 4 shutouts on the year. Incredible as it sounds, coming into the Michigan game, the Buckeyes held their opponents to an average of less than 5 points per game, while scoring better than 36 themselves.
Michigan, meanwhile, had quarterback Denny Franklin running the show with a year of experience under his belt. The Wolverines had an average margin of victory of 27 points over the course of the year, as they also entered the showdown unbeaten and untied. It was shaping up as the immovable object against the unbeatable foe. The crisis that developed was in the Ohio State camp. Despite the lofty records heading into the game, Coach Hayes would go into this edition of the 10-year war lacking a key ingredient in his attack.
No passing. Our quarterback had a thumb that was twice its size and could barely hold on the ball. And we didn't use him at all that week because we tried to pass him a little bit on Wednesday and he couldn't do it. And it was Cornelius Green was who it was.
So with Green at half throttle, the first half belonged to Archie Griffin. The sophomore sensation did it all. This 38-yard bit of brilliance set up an Ohio State field goal in the first quarter. With Griffin getting the ball on nearly every play, the Buckeyes drove 55 yards in the second quarter for the half's only TD. And it came as Big P. Johnson rolled in from the 5. At the half, Ohio State led 10-0, and Griffin had outgained the entire Michigan team.
The second half was a different story, though, as the Wolverines began to grind it out. In the fourth quarter, Lantry hit a 30-yard field goal to make it a 10-3 game. One possession later, Michigan continued to charge. Here, Denny Franklin hits Paul Seal for a 27-yard gain deep into Buckeye territory. And then, with the game in the balance, 4th and 1 from the Buckeye 10, Franklin ran the option to perfection, faking to Shuttlesworth and going into the end zone for the tying score. The Wolverines kept the pressure on for the rest of the game, but Lantry missed 2 field goals, and this classic ended in a 10-10 tie.
Most assumed Michigan would go west, but an injury to Franklin had the conference athletic directors voting an emergency session in Chicago.
Walking down the street, and I just see a mass of television, radio reporters massed at the door. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. I've seen enthusiasm for going to the Rose Bowl, but I haven't seen this at midnight. It was at midnight. And as I walked down there, a couple of the guys ran up to me and said, "What did you think of the vote?" And I said, "What vote?" And he said, "They voted Ohio State to go to the Rose Bowl." I says, you can't be serious.
When the vote sent him to the Rose Bowl, even Woody was surprised.
A little bit, because Michigan's always stood very strong in the conference politically. Very strong. And I thought they'd vote for them, because I'm not very popular, frankly. Didn't try to be. I wasn't winning a popularity contest. I think the biggest factor, because they won the last half, we won the first half, and people always remember the last half. I think the biggest factor that went against them, their quarterback got a broken shoulder in the game. And the Big Ten had won for a couple or 3 years out there, and they wanted to send the best team.
That, no matter how you add it up, was the bitterest moment I've ever had in coaching. That was the biggest defeat I've ever been dealt. Nor will I ever. I can't conceive of there being anything worse than what they did to my team.
He let everybody know how he felt about that. It's all over the country. He was even on a TV talk show in New York, and he told them over there, too. And what did I say? I just sat back and sort of grinned down the chest.
During the era of 1973 and 74, we tied for the championship with Ohio State all 3 years. Those years, they beat us in the final game and had every right to go to the Rose Bowl. In that game 73 in between, we tied for the championship, and Michigan should have a stretch where we won 30 games, lost 2, and tied 1, and never played in a bowl game. No other team I know of in the United States of America was subjected to that kind of treatment. And our own conference did it to us, and our own athletic directors. And if those people think another thing coming,
At this point, we're halfway through the 10-year war, and even the vote couldn't take away from the classic battles. 4 of the 5 years the Big Ten title and Rose Bowl representatives were decided. And close, well, it couldn't have gotten any closer.
No, Jim, it couldn't. Through the first 5 years, Woody had won 2 and Bo had won 2. And one game ended in a tie. In total points, over the 5 games, Michigan had outscored Ohio State by just 1 point, 64-63.
Yes, the rivalry had gotten even better, thanks to Woody and Bo.
In 1974, it was business as usual. Michigan and Ohio State were on a collision course for year 6 of the 10-year war. Despite the fact that Archie Griffin was on his way to a Heisman Trophy, the Buckeyes did stumble once in the conference. It came against Michigan State in a controversial finish, but the loss was the only blemish on the Buckeyes' record. Other than that, Ohio State had been bombing people. 3 of their wins were by more than 40 points, and the rest of their victories were by at least 2 touchdowns.
In Ann Arbor, Michigan, still smarting from the previous year's Rose Bowl voting snub, was hungry for postseason play. The Wolverines, with a smooth and experienced offense, roared through the season. Michigan had recorded 4 shutouts as they entered the game, but there was some concern in the Wolverines' camp. Both Wisconsin and Illinois had nearly upset the Maize and Blue. Sometimes the Wolverines played just well enough to win, and that wouldn't do against Ohio State. But they survived the scares and entered the game against the Buckeyes unbeaten. As always, the anticipation for this one was boiling to a fever pitch, but the game plans on both sides remained simple.
the team that makes the fewest mistakes blocks the best, tackles the best. Basic fundamentals of the game. Because both teams are going to play with tremendous emotion. That team's going to win the game. And since both teams have been so close physically, that the games have been 2, 3, 4, maybe a touchdown. And that's it.
See, this game is played by momentum, and it changes in the doggone thing.
Michigan grabbed the momentum early in this one as Franklin hooked up with flanker Gil Chapman for a 42-yard touchdown and a 7-0 Wolverine lead. The Michigan defense kept Ohio State at bay, here forcing a corny green fumble and stalling a Buckeye drive. Gordon Bell then took over for Michigan. He carried 7 times in the next drive and chewed up good yardage before the Ohio State defense stiffened. Mike Lantry then came on to boot a 37-yard field goal, and with just 10 minutes gone, Michigan led 10-0. But that's all the Wolverines would get for the rest of the day as the Buckeye defense tightened down the screws, and a kid named Tom Claiborne took over.
It was the field goal game. What's that kid's name?
Claiborne.
I, on purpose, forgot his name. Kicked 4 wild field goals. I don't think he kicked that many before or since, has he?
Early in the second quarter, Claiborne hit from 47 yards and got the Bucks to within 7 at 10-3. With a little less than 6 minutes left in the half, he hit from 25 yards. Now it was a 10-6 game. And with just 6 seconds left in the half, Claiborne made it 3 for 3. This time from 43 yards out, and just like that, it was a 10-9 game at the half. Claiborne then made it a 12-10 Ohio State lead early in the third quarter from 45 yards out.
3 of them were over 40 yards. Oh, it was an enormous job that he did that day. Just wonderful.
But Michigan wouldn't go down without a fight. Just 57 seconds remained when Denny Franklin hit Jim Smith for 27 yards into Buckeye territory. With just 16 seconds left, Mike Lantry could win it for Michigan from 33 yards away. The kick was wide left by a fraction, and Ohio State was a narrow 12-10 winner.
We had a short field goal attempt, not more than a 30-yarder, I don't think, a chance to win it. And I want you to know that ball was close.
Well, the rest of our offense wasn't very good that year. Bo had a great defensive team. But we did move the ball enough to get into kicking range 4 times. And, of course, you'd usually miss one of those. But Tom didn't.
As the 10-year war reached year 7, Ohio State seemed to be taking control of the rivalry. Archie Griffin was on his way to an unprecedented second straight Heisman, and he was getting plenty of help in the backfield from a battering Ram fullback named Pete Johnson. The Bucks served notice early that they were for real over Michigan State, and then reeled off 3 straight non-conference wins over Penn State, North Carolina, and UCLA. The rest of the season was more of the same as Ohio State rolled into the Michigan game unbeaten, and they were winning by more than 4 touchdowns each time they teed it up.
Michigan, on the other hand, was rebuilding, but they also had a youngster who would impact the series like Griffin had 3 years earlier. The kid's name was Leach. He played quarterback, and in year 7 of the hostilities, number 7 for the Wolverines would learn about the war. Leach started the year slowly. The Wolverines were 1-0-2 after their first 3 games. But as the conference schedule approached, Leach and Michigan were ready for a run at the title. They had scares against Michigan State, Illinois, and Minnesota. They moved into their showdown against the Buckeyes unbeaten in the Big Ten. There wasn't much question. Young Rick Leach was coming of age. But against Ohio State in 1975, the Wolverines were outmanned.
75 was an interesting year for us for this reason. It was probably one of our less talented teams. And we were playing with a freshman quarterback by the name of Rick Leach.
The rivalry was just bitter. And, of course, that was Arch's senior year.
We were tied early in the season by Baylor and Stanford. We came down to the Ohio State game. We're still undefeated. Even though we had 2 non-conference ties, we're undefeated with a chance to win the championship.
But Ohio State was spoiling Bo's plans early. Corny Green hit Pete Johnson for a 7-yard TD, and it was 7-0 Buckeyes. Michigan finally came back just before the half as Gordon Bell threw the halfback option pass. Jim Smith made the circus count even at 7 after 30 minutes. It stayed tied into the fourth quarter when Michigan made their charge. Here, Leach finds Smith for a key 11-yard gain. And then the freshman quarterback called his own number on the goal line as the Wolverines moved in front of the favored Buckeyes 14-7. The next possession was now critical for Ohio State.
We marched the 2 quarters, they controlled the game. Then in the fourth quarter, we took it and went 80 yards for a touchdown, and most of it passing. Brian on 3rd down caught a 12-yard pass for a first down and got us out to the 32-yard line on an outcut. And then Arch went for 17 on the run off the same action exactly. And then we marched right down and scored and tied the ball game 14-14.
Ohio State came back and scored a touchdown on an 80-yard drive, in which it's one of those drives where You look at 2, 3 plays that you say, how in the world did they ever get out of trouble with that play? Stop them once. Just stop them once. And take control of the ball and run out the clock. We got the game. And we never got that play.
With the score tied and only 3 minutes left, Bo went for the big play deep in his own territory. It backfired. The pass was picked off by Ray Griffin, and he returned it to the Wolverine doorstep. The pass was a gamble, but no surprise to win.
Well, Bo had said before the ball game, see, that's why you don't want to talk newspaper. He'd said, I'm not playing for a tie again. See, he'd learned his lesson. He wasn't going to play for a tie.
We would not have gone to the Rose Bowl unless we won the game. So Leach threw deep in his territory, and Griffin picked it off, ran it down the goal line, and they went in to win 21-14. If the truth were known, we were not as good a team as Ohio State. And Ohio State went to the Rose Bowl. I can't tell you who they played or where they won. But for the first time, if we were the first conference team to go to a bowl other than the Rose Bowl.
Both teams went to bowls, and both teams lost. Woody to UCLA in the Rose Bowl, and Bo to eventual national champ Oklahoma in the Orange Bowl.
This might sound like an alibi, but I know Bo will say the same thing. You put out so much in this Michigan game that even your Rose Bowl is anticlimactic. Turns out that way you're flat after you've played that Michigan game, because that is your season.
This year was a turning point in the Big Ten. As you heard Bo say, it was the first time ever in modern football that a Big Ten team other than the champion went to a bowl game. And you've got to admit, Paul, Michigan deserved bowl bids earlier, but the archaic Big Ten rules wouldn't allow it. It took Michigan to get it. Wolverines a vote of thanks for opening up the bowl season to everyone.
I look at it a little differently, Jim.
You know, that doesn't surprise me at all.
No, you see, if Ohio State hadn't have beaten Michigan all those years, maybe nothing would have changed, and the Big Ten would still be sending just one team to a bowl game. So instead of thanking Michigan, to the Buckeyes for being so dominant and forcing a change, Ohio State has always been a leader. You'll admit that. And in this instance, the change was just for the better.
You know, Paul, now I know why you were considered such a great receiver.
Really? Why?
Because you run the quick out so well. 1976 was a year of change, and the winds of change swept across the Michigan-Ohio State series. The name that would dominate in year 8 of the 10-year war came from Michigan. Rick Leach had come of age. With able assistance from talented running backs Rob Lytle and Russell Davis, the Wolverines had moved through the year to the #1 ranking in the national polls. In their first 3 games, Michigan averaged 53 points while allowing their opponents just 9. While the Wolverines stumbled against Purdue 16-14 and lost their #1 ranking, they were still the heavy favorite over Ohio State.
The Buckeyes, on the other hand, started the year slowly. After winning their first 2, they lost to Missouri and tied UCLA to put Coach Hayes into a tough mood as the rest of the conference schedule loomed ahead. But the Buckeyes responded after that and moved through the rest of the season with only one scare, a 9-3 win over Minnesota. That meant Michigan, Ohio State would battle again for the title and the Rose Bowl. But the injury factor became a key ingredient for this year's matchup. The week before the big game, #1 Buckeye quarterback Rod Jarrell was injured. The injury forced a change in strategy for Coach Hayes as he entered the game with backup quarterback Tom Placenta at the helm.
Rod was knocked out in the Purdue game, and we lost him that year. So, Tom played good ball, but he wasn't any Rod Jarrell. It took away a large part of our offense when he knew that we couldn't run the option play. Then we had to resort to our pitch sweep whenever we wanted to go wide. Well, he knew how to play that.
The defenses dominated in the opening half, and it was a scoreless tie at intermission. Then in the third quarter, the Wolverines started to move against an overworked Buckeye defense. Rob Lytle began ripping off big yardage, and Rick Leach turned broken plays into big plays as the Wolverines marched towards the game's first touchdown. Fullback Russell Davis did the honors from the 3-yard line, and Michigan had broken through against the tough Buckeye defense. The touchdown seemed to charge Michigan, and they got the ball right back, and as soon as they did, Lytle went back to work. He began pounding away at Ohio State, and the yardage started to come in bigger chunks. Davis scored his second touchdown of the quarter over right guard, and with a two-point conversion, Michigan was on top 15-0. Ohio State desperately tried to get back in it, but this was the Wolverines' day, and a Pacetta pass was picked off late in the fourth quarter and returned to the Buckeye 15. Lytle then finished the job scoring from the 3-0. In the process, they had outgained the Bucks 259-63 in the deciding second half.
That team, 76, was a great offensive team. We averaged a lot of points. We rolled up a lot of yardage. It was Leach's sophomore year and Lytle at tailback, and that was a good ball club.
Our defense was in too long in that ball game, and as a result, they finally broke down a little and both scored 22 points, and that's the most, I believe, you ever scored on us, except in that 1969 game.
I would not say that was a one-sided game, because the first half was as even as anything I know. And although we were confident at halftime, we had no idea we could go out and put 22 points on the board and win it with a shutout.
That ball game is the only game that got away from us. The first half was 0-0, and as I mentioned, we almost scored. Then the second half, they took it away from us totally, and that's the only game that had any big margin. They beat us 22-0.
As far as Woody was concerned, the 76 game featured one player that made the difference. He was Michigan's Rob Lytle.
He's the most effective back we ever met. And I hear the year that they beat us 22-0, he played both tailback and fullback and was enormously effective in both, particularly the second half.
In his senior year, had a great day for us.
He made just one mistake. He didn't come to Ohio State.
As the 10-year war neared its end, the intensity levels seemed to be growing, and all eyes remained on Ann Arbor as year 9 of the war unfolded. Michigan again had all the guns. Defensively, the Wolverines had improved thanks to the play of Ron Simpkins. And despite an upset loss to Minnesota that cost Michigan their #1 ranking, the Wolverines were solid. They had outscored their opponents in the conference 243-72. During the year, Michigan had racked up single-game point totals of 63 and 56 on their way to a 7-1 conference mark, and they would have Ohio State at home.
The Buckeyes, meanwhile, were not taking